Our country itself is sick. That it's lost its sense of direction, even its common decency.
You don't so much as wiggle a finger.
There's a lot of people saying a lot of things, but in the end, you gotta listen to yourself.
Oh my gosh, screaming inside. Welcome back. Elvis is in the building, and there are only a few figures in entertainment history that are as iconic as Elvis Presley. And in a new film by Baz Luhrmann and, of course, his life and story are all coming back to life.
So we are obviously thrilled to have the director and star of the highly anticipated movie Elvis, Baz Luhrmann, Austin Butler. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. And in Toronto.
And in Toronto.
I've lived here before.
I think it's a great omen to start here. I would just like to say, listen, we saw the film.
Yeah.
Cynthia and I were like grabbing each other at multiple times through the film.
Yes.
What a beautiful, emotional, raw journey through Elvis's life.
Thank you.
I've got to ask, why Elvis, Baz? Like, why Elvis's story, and why now, and why tell it this
well,
way?
actually, we were chatting together on the way in, and you guys said you saw the movie, you felt you'd been at a rock show, but you also were talking about it at dinner. And some beautiful things that Cynthia said is that, you know, you learned so much about Elvis you didn't know, particularly about giving credit where credit is due and the fact that he grew up, his association with so many iconic black musicians coming up with him together, but also the relevance of what was going on in that time to now. I think for all those reasons, I wanted to do it. Plus, you know, he's kind of cool and sings well.
Just a little bit. Austin, I mean, you are just incredible in this role. It is. I didn't know a lot about Elvis going into this, but I sort of fell into this trance. And you, I mean, I would not have known that you were you. I kept on losing myself just seeing Elvis Presley. So what did it take for you to get into this role?
It was a lot. I mean, we had 2 years where I didn't do anything else, and I mean, I always try to abridge this part of it, and then I have things afterwards where I'm like, oh yeah, and I did that. I had a karate instructor and many singing coaches and dialect coaches and my incredible movement coach, Polly Bennett. And with Polly, I mean, we did everything from tap dancing, swing dancing. I studied all the influences that Elvis had, so watching Little Richard and studying his movements. And Baz and I went down to a gospel church and got to experience what it feels like when you're moved by the spirit of spiritual music in that way. And that was really informative because Elvis never had choreography. It was about the music moving him. So for me, I then always knew that if I wasn't feeling the feeling I felt in that church, then I wasn't feeling it, then I was off, you know? So yeah, it was a year and a half before I started shooting of just experimenting with everything.
Austin, you play Elvis throughout many different decades, and you know, from when he's just starting out and he's a nervous sort of kid, right to the end. Was there an era that was most challenging to sort of get into?
I try to think about that. They each had their own challenges because we were filming out of sequence. Initially, I remember when we very first met, we had this romantic idea that we could somehow film it in chronological order, and I thought, well, okay, so then maybe I'll be able to take a break and gain the weight, and that's kind of how I imagined that we would be able to do it. And then with the COVID of it all and scheduling everything, so we would be switching back and forth. So some days I'm in 72, the next I'm in 56.
Wow.
And
Whoa.
it's the challenge of having to ground yourself in where he is emotionally, spiritually, physically, vocally at every one of those periods. So there's not just one. I mean, there's certain moments that were more challenging maybe than others, but it's kind of how it all fit together. You know?
That is amazing. I didn't realize that you shot like that. Okay, so Baz, Cannes Film Festival, let's go back there for a second. The movie is shown, gets a 12-minute standing ovation.
That's good.
Tough crowd, great standing ovation.
They boo in Cannes. I was there when I was 29, I've opened it twice. They don't like your movie, you hear woo. And so we heard,
A 12-minute, including Priscilla Presley, who tweeted, obviously, so many other things. And she said, not an empty seat in the theater. Austin Butler's performance as Elvis was mesmerizing. I mean, listen. I mean, getting the approval from the audiences and all of that is one thing. Getting Priscilla's stamp of approval?
It was everything. It was everything because it wasn't, oh gosh, there we are. You can see how emotional we are. We're not kidding here. Like, the relief. Like, by the way, during the film, at the musical numbers, from Little Richard on, they started applauding to the musical numbers like they were at a rock show.
Yeah.
That was an emotional experience. But I've opened Can twice, but all that, yeah, sure. But I've never been more nervous because Priscilla and Lisa Marie and Roddy, they don't control the estate. They didn't dictate what I should do. I met them early on. COVID kept us estranged. I didn't know what they'd think, and no screening made me more nervous, anxious, and worried than when I had to show them the film. I mean, to the world, maybe he's an icon. To some younger people, maybe he's a Halloween costume.
Right.
But to them, he's a husband and a father and a grandfather, a person. And the humanity of Elvis, just meeting the person, that's what Austin was tasked with. So we were so nervous about it.
Baz, as we were talking just before we went to air, race is really at the center of this film.
Sure, because it's the center of America.
Exactly, but it was just so interesting to see how many parallels there were to today.
Yep.
Like, what commentary were you trying to convey as it relates to, like, Elvis's story?
I mean, it's not so much a commentary, but actually, you can't tell his story without engaging with his relationship with black music, his relationship growing up in that one of the few white houses during segregation. That scene where he's in the gospel tent and his little friend, he's in a little group of African-American kids, and the preacher reaches out and grabs him. I met that man. I found him, and I videoed him, and he told me that story verbatim. You take that out of Elvis's story, I don't think you're telling Elvis's story, and you're not telling the story of America. So it's important that we show the lineage, the DNA, give credit where credit is due, which is what Austin obviously says. So I stole that line from him. But he says, you know, we got to give credit where credit is due. We've got to show the true story.
Austin, as Baz has mentioned, you sung for real when you were playing young Elvis, but you'd never before professionally sang. So talk about the vocal training. Like, you have still so much of him in your voice too. So talk about that experience and what you had to do to make that happen.
Well, it began by listening to his entire catalog. And so in the same way as you listen to every interview he ever gave, there's a whole catalog of all of his interviews, but then you listen to the way that he used his voice while singing, and it changes a lot over the years. And so I wanted to prepare, just in case, I wanted to prepare to be able to sing it all. Though I knew that from the get-go, Baz told me very early on, well, the 50s was recorded on acetate. It's mono, we can't use it. So it's gonna have to be your voice. So that, I felt, that would wake me up in the morning at 3 in the morning. And I would have a certain song that I knew I needed to work on, and I would listen to 3 seconds of it and just hear how he hit a certain note and just practice it a million times and record myself, listen back and figure out what sounds different, and then you sort of just piece that together for the whole thing. And so it was a lot of obsession.
No kidding, no kidding. You've got icons all around you. You have Baz Luhrmann sitting there.
I mean, he's an icon.
Right?
Yeah.
I love that. Now I'm really old.
No.
Icons have to be really old.
No, that's not. Although my father does say
he's a very young, dashing icon.
Exactly.
Miss
Look at
Baz
him.
And very
Luhrmann.
deaf. Say that again.
Yes. But also, let's not forget Tom Hanks playing Tom Parker in the film. What does a Tom Hanks tell you on set to give you advice? Or did he even give you any guidance in this iconic role?
He did give me advice, but I mean, I think back to the first time that I met him. I was telling this story the other day, how it's the thing of meeting your heroes, where you don't know if you're gonna be able to get past the fact that this is Tom Hanks. I feel like he's a part of my family because the amount of times he's been on my TV as a kid. And all throughout my life. I mean, he's one of the greatest actors of all time. And so the very first time I met him was in Baz's backyard, and he gives me this giant hug, and then he quickly broke down any of those barriers, and he said, you know, I was at the studio earlier, and I was trying to choose which door I was gonna throw up outside of the first week. And I said, why, are you scared? And he goes, yeah. I go, you're scared? I'm terrified. And then from that moment, then I thought, oh, Tom Hanks feels fear? You know, Tom Hanks cares in that same way. And so then we were colleagues. And then we did things like, when he first arrived, he very generously gave me a typewriter. And with this typewriter came this letter that he had written from Colonel Tom Parker. And he says, on this machine, we can now communicate. And so I typed him back a letter as Elvis. And it became this way I've never rehearsed before, which is putting the mind of a human being onto the page and then sending it. And so then we sent these letters back and forth. I have a whole stack of them now. And that was an amazing way to sort of build backstory and richness.
Yeah.
And then we also, we just had the best time. It was incredible.
Unbelievable. Listen, I know you're about to just set this film loose around the world to be able to spend a few minutes with us. We really want to thank both of you for making us stop here.
You've created something really, really magical.
Really, really
Thanks
is.
so much. Really, it means a lot.
Thank you both, really and truly. This is where we tell everybody Elvis is in theaters June 24th. Get your tickets now. You do not want to miss this film. It's going to change you. We'll be back right after this.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
That's so nice.
And lovely set.
Yeah,
Oh, thank you.